Hey everyone. Today we're going to talk a little bit about one of my favorite bands, that is Depeche Mode. And Depeche Mode has just received quite an honor for, a band that's come from a small little town in England about, well, 45 years ago almost now, and has conquered the world much like the other bands of that era, the U2s and the like. So Depeche Mode has been given an official day in Los Angeles known as the Depeche Mode Day. And I think a lot of this has to do with the fact that at their height, at their peak, Depeche Mode was gigantic in America in that particular region. Los Angeles really pushed them. This is the 1990 Violator era, which is their album. And then they also had a follow up, which was a number one album, Songs of Faith and Devotion. And that 90s period was very, very, late 80s, 90s period was very, very crucial for their career. It's also where a lot of their addictions and traumas happened, but this was and is still considered to be their most achievement based work and just the most critically acclaimed. Both of those albums, I believe, are in the top 500 of the Rolling Stone magazine and of all time. At least Violator is, I know that for sure. I have personal favorites outside of those albums, but that is the era where they really reached their peak popularity, and Los Angeles was very instrumental to that. Just a little bit of a backstory, but in the 90s when or I should say in the late 80s when they were touring nonstop. I mean, all these bands from, as I mentioned, U2, INXS, Depeche, Duran, you could look through their discography and they all had albums virtually every year. They were just nonstop touring, nonstop albums, and all of it was pretty much quality work. And so that's very, that era was just very high output, high quality music. And they built, a lot of these bands built their following first in their own countries, of course, and then decided to go abroad. And America was always the place to conquer, right? To get heard internationally in order to have that global success. And Depeche ended up having a lot of success there in the late 80s, just much like the other bands as well. I think U2 maybe was the mid 80s, if I'm correct on that. But they all have a very similar arc. And what sent them over the top was a few things. One was their album Music for the Masses, which I believe was 1987. And a world tour they did to promote that album, which ended up at the end of it in Los Angeles at the Pasadena Rose Bowl, right? So this is where they had their first gigantic stadium show, if I'm not mistaken, and filled up, I don't know exact statistics, but it was a giant crowd. I think it was their biggest at that point. Now they play gigantic stadiums, and they've done, I think, some really, really gigantic ones, Wembley, etc. But that was their, at the time, their peak. And there's even a documentary on it called 101, where they follow the band and document that kind of really cult-like following they had and still have to this day. So after that performance, they just kept going up, and that was around that time. After that was Violator, which was still their most critically acclaimed album. And they did a few appearances. Them was right in LA as well, signing, and it went pretty much viral in the sense of like today's events that go, very just exploding everywhere. And what happened was they had a CD signing that was only supposed to house a certain amount of people, but the fandom was so big back then that these fans just ended up basically taking over the whole thing, just, really kind of invading Los Angeles, and it caused a lot of commotion. I mean, the streets were pandemonium. There was all kinds of stuff going on, and Depeche were kind of blamed for that. But it was a funny thing. It just really showed them how popular they really were in that country, the States. And another big factor of why they're so big in Los Angeles is because of a radio station called K-Rock, which really broke them in the States in terms of airplay, right? And again, to trace it back to these other bands as well, they all had that one little niche that kind of gave them that upper hand. So, for example, INXS broke through college radio, and Depeche were through K-Rock, which is a rock alternative station. So coupled putting all those things together and coupled with just this giant cult-like following, Depeche has been very, very successful there. I mean, they're successful globally. They're successful in every region, but that place is very, very much into them. I mean, it's a huge state, of course, but coupled with the fact that the primary songwriter Martin Gore lives in Los Angeles, I believe he still lives there, but I know he's lived there for at least a couple decades, if I'm not mistaken. And I believe the singer also lives in the states in New York. And of course, the third member, Andy Fletcher, passed away last year. He was in the UK, but it's still an amazing honor, whatever you may think of it. So, yeah, I'd just like to give a little bit of a backstory as to why they're so revered in Los Angeles and why it was declared Depeche Mode Day. I know a lot of this stuff is kind of trivial, but still a little bit of interesting backstory there. Thanks for listening.